About 5 years ago, I lived downtown in a major city in the US. I've always been a night person, so I would often find myself rather bored after my roommate, who was decidedly not a night person, went to sleep. To pass the time, I used to go for long walks and spend the time thinking. I spent 4 years like that, walking alone at night, and never once had a reason to feel afraid. I always used to joke with my roommate that even the drug dealers in the city were polite. But all of that changed in just a few minutes of one particular evening. It was a Wednesday, somewhere between 1 and 2 in the morning, and I was walking near a police-patrolled park quite a ways from my apartment. It was a quiet night, even for a weeknight, with very little traffic and almost no one on foot. The park, as it was most nights, was completely empty. I turned down a short side street in order to loop back to my apartment when I first noticed him. At the far end of the street on my side was the silhouette of a man dancing. It was a strange dance, similar to a waltz, but finishing each box with an odd forward stride. I guess you could say he was dance walking, headed straight for me. Deciding he was probably drunk, I stepped as close as I could to the road to give him the majority of the sidewalk to pass me by. The closer he got, the more I realized how gracefully he was moving. He was very tall and lanky and wearing an old suit. He danced closer still until I could make out his face. His eyes were open wide and wild, head tilted back slightly, looking off at the sky. His mouth was formed in a painfully wide cartoon of a smile. Between the eyes and the smile, I decided to cross the street before he danced any closer to me. I took my eyes off him to cross the empty street. As I reached the other side, I glanced back, and then stopped dead in my tracks. He had stopped dancing and was standing with one foot in the street, perfectly parallel to me. He was facing me, but still looking skyward, smile still wide on his lips. I was completely and utterly unnerved by this. I started walking again, but kept my eyes on the man. He didn't move. Once I had put about half a block between us, I turned away from him for a moment to watch the sidewalk in front of me. The street and sidewalk ahead of me were completely empty. Still unnerved, I looked back to where he had been standing to find him gone. For the briefest of moments, I felt relieved, until I noticed him again. He had crossed the street and was now slightly crouched down. I couldn't tell for sure due to the distance and the shadows, but I was certain he was facing me. I had looked away from him for no more than 10 seconds, so it was clear that he had moved rather fast. I was so shocked that I stood there for some time, just staring at him. And then he started moving towards me again. He took giant, exaggerated tiptoed steps as if he were a cartoon character sneaking up on someone. Except he was moving very, very quickly. I'd like to say that at this point I ran away or pulled out my pepper spray or my cell phone or anything at all. But I didn't. I just stood there completely frozen as the smiling man crept towards me. And then he stopped again, about a car length away from me, still smiling his smile, still looking to the sky. When I finally found my voice, I blurted out the first thing that came to mind. What I meant to ask was, "What the hell do you want?" in an angry, commanding tone. What came out was more of a whimper. "What the hell?" Regardless of whether or not humans can smell fear, they can certainly hear it. I heard it in my own voice, and that only made me more afraid. But he didn't react to it at all. He just stood there, smiling. And then, after what felt like forever, he turned around, very slowly, and started dance walking away, just like that. Not wanting to turn my back to him again, I just watched him go until he was far enough away to be almost out of my sight. And then I realized something. He wasn't moving away anymore, nor was he dancing. I watched in horror as the distant shape of him grew larger and larger. He was coming back my way, and this time he was running. I ran too. I ran until I was off the side of the road and back onto the better lit road with a sparse traffic. Looking behind me, he was nowhere to be found. The rest of the way home, I kept glancing over my shoulder, always expecting to see a stupid smile. But he was never there. I lived in that city for 6 months after that night, and I never went out for another walk. There was something about his face that always haunted me. He didn't look drunk, he didn't look high. He looked completely and utterly insane. And that is a very, very scary thing to see. When I was a child, there was an urban legend that went around my school about a monster. Nobody knew who started it, but we called it the legend of the falling smile. The story went that there was a creature in our town. Nobody can see it, but they can hear it. The sound of its jaws clicking together as it lumbers through the streets. The crunch of it chewing the teeth off its victims. It's a terrifying creature. And it's always hungry. No matter how much it gets, it will never be full. Always watching. Always waiting. They say the first victim of the monster was the daughter of the town founder himself, Beatrice Holloway. Beatrice was a perfectly normal girl until around the age of 7. She began to complain of a clicking noise outside her window at night. Her family brushed it off as childhood paranoia, but she continued to suffer. Beatrice continued to complain of the noise for months, but she was always ignored. One afternoon, she went into the forest to explore when the clicking began again, louder than ever. A feeling of unease washed over her. She felt like her heart would beat out of her chest, like a bomb ready to explode. She turned back, desperate to get somewhere safe, when a sharp pain burst through her mouth. One by one, her teeth began to loosen and drop out. Beatrice started to scream as the blood ran down her chin. The little girl fell to the ground, only to see a puddle of blood and teeth that had left her body just seconds ago. She felt herself losing control and tried to tell herself it was only a nightmare. But she knew better than that. Her teeth kept falling until all that was left was a bloody mess inside her mouth. She held her knees together and sobbed in agony until she no longer felt the pain. The little girl lay dead in the forest, a mound of teeth beside her for the creature to enjoy. Her mouth was locked in a permanent scream, but there was no one there to hear it. So, if you ever find yourself alone and you hear that telltale clicking, run. And that was the legend of the falling smile. It passed through playground to classroom, from the eldest to the youngest. No matter who you were, you knew of the creature. Of course, the teachers and parents tried to put a stop to it, but by the time they caught on what was being shared, everyone already knew the stories. In the end, it became something of a wives' tale, something parents told children to make them behave. I first heard the story from some older kids at my school. It never bothered me as much as it did for the others. Sure, when I heard a noise outside at night, my mind occasionally jumped to the creature, but I never really believed it. I had no reason to. That was until I grew up and joined the local police force. I hadn't planned on joining the force, of course. I kinda just fell into it after graduation. I've never really been academically gifted in any way, and I lacked motivation all throughout high school. I was too poor to afford tuition of any kind of higher education, and even if I could, the chances of me being accepted were extremely low. So, when my uncle told me he could get me a position, I reluctantly agreed, knowing it was probably my best option, and my parents were desperate to have me out of the house. My first few months after basic training were pretty boring. My fellow officers were tolerable, and the pay was steady enough for me to get my own apartment and live independently. But God, did it get boring. There was almost nothing for me to do aside from the occasional bike theft. Don't get me wrong, it's not like I wanted more crime, but I still felt the tedium of walking my beat every day, knowing it would amount to absolutely nothing. Now I wish I could go back to that. The first body showed up around a month ago. A family found it while they were having a day at the lake. Apparently, it was their kids who saw it first. Or felt it, I should say. One of them stepped on its hand and got a nasty shock. The parents pulled it out and called it in. And, as luck would have it, I was placed on the recovery team. I've never had a strong stomach. When I saw the body, I couldn't help but gag. God knows how long it had been in that leg. It was bloated and covered in black blood. The smell was atrocious, so bad that the other officers looked like they were going to throw up themselves. Parts of its skin had rotted away, exposing the muscle underneath. But the worst part was the face. It was locked in a silent scream, the eyes full of terror and the mouth wide open. Inside the mouth lay empty gums, rotting and festering. Instantly my mind went to the legend of the falling smile. At first I told myself there was no way it could be true. Bodies had teeth missing all the time. There could be any number of reasons behind it that didn't involve creatures or legends or that damned clicking noise. But my denial was cut short when another body was found. Early one morning, citizens awoke to find a woman lying dead in the middle of the road. She had that twisted scream as the previous body, and her mouth still leaked blood from her mutilated gums. Then a third was discovered in a back alley, in an advanced state of decay. The fourth in a family backyard. People started to disappear and later be found dead. The cause of death for all of them was listed as extreme blood loss. I don't think I need to tell you the other connection they shared. As of today, 27 bodies have been found toothless, scattered around the town at random. I hope to God they didn't suffer the fate of the creature. I hope to God there isn't a creature, that this is all some weird coincidence. Bollocks, I would even take a deranged serial killer over the alternative. Anything but a goddamn monster. It came around 3 a.m. I was getting ready for bed when it started. The faint clicking noise outside in the yard. It didn't sound quite human, yet somehow I couldn't place my finger on it. I froze listening to it. It came again and again, louder and faster each time. It kept getting closer and closer until finally I could hear it right outside my bedroom window. My heart went cold. I guess it's my turn soon. I was reading online, specifically on Reddit, about how to regain my wife's respect, and as I was reading, a certain subreddit told me I should cry in front of her with a dead rabbit in my arms. Unfortunately, I feel that she lost respect with me even more so. I was sure that I did everything correctly, so I went back to that post, and it had more instructions on what to do should it fail. If crying in front of my wife with a dead rabbit wouldn't work, then I would have to cry in front of her with her own dead parents in my arms. Naturally, I went and killed her parents, and I started crying in front of her. She just found me even more pathetic and embarrassing. I was so confused, and I had no idea what I was doing wrong. I murdered her parents. I started crying in front of her, but she still had no respect for me. This was all very frustrating, and I went back to that Reddit post, and it had even more instructions. If crying in front of her dead parents wouldn't work, then you must murder some of her friends and cry in front of her with them. So, of course, I murdered one of her friends and I cried in front of her again. And then another, until I had a few of her dead friends in my arms. I could see her respect for me diminish much further than before. How low can I go in front of her? I'm trying to gain her respect of me, but it is so hard. she started to find me repetitive and boring. I looked into the mirror and shouted at myself to stop being boring. And then I went back to that post, and there were more instructions. If murdering one of her friends and crying in front of her wouldn't work, then I should just go ahead and murder my children and then cry in front of her. So I murdered my children and again cried in front of her. She called me pathetic and I was humiliated. I then walked away and I was angry at that subreddit post until I read the title. The subreddit was called Bad Advice. It's a subreddit that purposely gives, well, let's say very, very bad advice on how to maintain a marriage. And oops, I thought to myself, I simply didn't realize which subreddit I was on. Staring blankly forward in my second period English class, I caught a whiff of an unmistakable smell, ever so faint, but undeniably present. The smell of death. At least, that's what I call it. For over a year now, whenever someone's about to kick the bucket, I can smell it in the air. It started with the air getting thick and soupy. Then comes the smell, sweet and tangy like fermenting fruit. The closer I am to the deceased, and the closer they are to dying, the stronger and more putrid the smell is. Maybe it's some kind of psychic premonition. Some people see visions. I literally smell the future. Who knows how things like this work? The first time I smelled death, I was in the hospice with my 91-year-old grandmother. My parents stepped out of the room to discuss options with the doctor and left me all alone by her bedside. "Herbert, is that you?" She looked up at me, thinking I was her late husband. I'm afraid," she said, and that's when the smell hit me. I had to run over to a garbage can and start dry heaving. At first I thought maybe she just soiled herself, but then the machines all around her started going haywire. The doctor rushed in and told us we had to leave the room. She was dead in less than 3 minutes. Since then, the smell has always been around me, but usually it's more imperceptible. Every now and then, though, the smell gets so strong I practically blow chunks, and I always learn that someone nearby passed away. Once it was a car accident I saw about a block away. I could smell it from all the way down the road. One of the drivers wasn't wearing a seatbelt and smashed in their heads on the steering wheel. The only question on my mind was, why am I smelling this now? Before I could even begin to consider the smell, it ramped up times 100, causing me to gag and puke a little in my mouth. Death never smelled like this before. It was suffocating. Normally I could tell where the smell was coming from, but not this time. It was all around me. I had to leave the room. I got up and rushed out of the classroom, heading to the closest bathroom to hurl and rinse out my mouth. As soon as I got to the toilet and started hurling, I heard the bangs, followed by screams. The smell was so bad I could barely think. What the hell is going on? There were more bangs and a huge commotion, the sound of many people running as fast as they could. I wasn't sure if I should run or hide in the bathroom, and that's when I heard the bathroom door slam open. That's when I realized why the smell followed me into the bathroom. That's when I knew that the stink of death was coming from me. I'm the poorest man living in a mansion, and whenever I tell people that, they tell me to sod off. I really am, though, the poorest man living in a mansion, and my emotions get the better of me, unfortunately. So I go out in public, and I tell everyone that I truly am the poorest man. Everyone knows me because of the house I live in, and I have been neglecting keeping the doors locked, not caring when strangers come in to steal stuff. Recently, people are more interested in human-shaped UFOs. They all care more about otherworldly visitors than they do their own kind. Then a crowd started gathering as they were all witnessing another human-shaped UFO, and the UFO did have a human shape to it. I couldn't believe the amount of gathering there was for this human-shaped UFO. I tried to keep shouting at my peril at being the poorest man living in the mansion in the most expensive neighborhood. None cared, and all they cared about was this human-shaped UFO. Then, when I used a telescope to look closer at this human-shaped UFO, I couldn't believe it. It was truly humanly shaped. To me, it wasn't a UFO though, because I recognized it. It was truly a falling human, and it was one of my children. I started to scream at everyone that it wasn't a human-shaped UFO, but an actual falling human, that it was my child. One of my children falling through the skies, and everyone thought it was a human-shaped UFO. Then another human-shaped UFO could be seen, and everyone was so intrigued. They want to think that their area is a special place because their lives are so meaningless. I looked through my telescope to observe this second human-shaped UFO. People tend to carry telescopes in this area because that's how many weird things go through our skies. I was able to determine that the second human-shaped UFO was also my second child. Again, I tried shouting to get everyone's attention, but they all shushed me. My two children falling through the skies, and they reminded me of when I was truly rich, when I had all my children, parents, siblings, all living in my mansion. That's when I was truly rich. Then I borrowed them off to a stranger, because he told me that he needed some of that richness. Now they're all falling through the skies, including my parents and siblings, but everyone thinks they are human-shaped UFOs. I am truly the poorest man living in a mansion. The bleeding man stumbled but kept on following. The bleeding man with vacant eyes moaned fiendishly as he tried to catch up. The bleeding man with footsteps that matched your heartbeat. The more you get scared, the faster he chases. And he stops when your heartbeat stops. When you are dead. I had heard tales of the bleeding man, and parties where you cannot put a face to the words that you hear, at parties where you go to drown the voices. The ones from the outside, and the ones from within. They said the worst thing that the bleeding man does is... I don't quite remember what they said, or just got lost in the noise of the music. I turned to look over my shoulder. He was closer than before. The more tired I got, the faster my heart beat, and the longer his strides got. But I can see him more clearly now. Though I couldn't really place the face, I had seen him before. He was not a complete stranger. Maybe someone I had seen on the bus, an acquaintance from the past. Somebody I had wronged unknowingly. The ghosts of my other misdeeds have haunted me before. All those times I broke my promises, all those times I let my loved ones down. Those ghosts have haunted me in the nights all the time. But never tried to kill me. But this one... Who was he? Had I run someone over? The bleeding man grew taller as I granted him more thought. He got muscular as I thought more about him, tried to decode him, if you will. Gained more ground with the newfound strength I had given him. He reached out for me, scratching the back of my neck. I whimpered and quickened my pace. Through the parked cars, zigzagging my way to the elevator bay that I could now see on the horizon, thinking about good things, I was telling myself. Think about the time you went on the vacation. The vacation you went because your heart broke and you were too scared to face it and literally ran away. Bloody hell, that was not a good thought. Try something else, I told myself. Think about the first bicycle you were gifted. The one that you hated so much because everyone else had better ones. Because your best friend called you a sissy girl for riding one with no bars. Every good thought can become a bad one if you think it long enough. A hand came over my shoulder and covered my face. A decayed hand with boils and blood dripping. I fell to the floor, hit my head on the cement, and tears filled my eyes. Through the water, I could see the shape of the bleeding man looming over me. He leaned down to have a good look at me, and I got a good look at him. Still no recognition. Still can't place that damned face. He started to weep as he unfolded a blade and started to carve into my face. His tears met my fresh blood. My leg shuffled onto the parking floor, trying to get away, but slipped on the ample blood that had now formed a pool around me. The physical pain was refreshing after the agonizing thoughts. I closed my eyes and relished it. After all these years, never had something felt so liberating. Not a bad thought hanging around waiting to get me. Just pure, unadulterated, red pain. I opened my eyes and screamed. He had left me undead. Hadn't finished the job he had started. And then I remembered. Yes. That was the worst thing that he did, I remembered. He leaves you bleeding and moaning fiendishly. Oh. Now I know who he was. The Kenton family are keeping someone hostage in their household, and I have overheard them many times talking about it. About how something should be locked up in the house. In the general sense, they are rather beloved by the whole neighborhood. As in, everyone just had this positive vibe about them, the kind of vibe that makes everyone smile. Now, I don't really enjoy overhearing things, but for some reason I tend to. I just tend to overhear stuff. People usually do not see me coming up behind them, and I sometimes just shock them because they simply do not notice me. I found the eldest daughter of the Kenton household, and I asked her about what they shouldn't let out of the house. She then told me that I could sleep in her bedroom, in secret of course, and when everybody is out. As per the secrecy, I of course slept under the bed of the Kenton's eldest daughter, and honestly it wasn't that bad. The first night, I heard Mr. Kenton getting viciously angry, and I'd never even seen or heard him like this before. I didn't think he was the angry type, one of those calm people. Then Mrs. Kenton became angry at the children, and then the two younger children started acting out, apart from the eldest daughter. Then when the house was empty, I went searching for this thing that isn't allowed outside the Kenton household. I searched everywhere. Then I finally retired to the eldest daughter's bedroom. Well, under her bed, I mean. When she came home, I told her that I couldn't find anything in her house, but she just told me to search harder. There is something within this house that is being kept invisible from the neighborhood. Mr. Kenton, in a sudden rage, started physically beating his whole family, and the next day, he was a completely different person when talking to the neighbors. Like a switch that was turning on and off. Even Mrs. Kenton was, well, dysfunctional, and she liked to beat on the kids when she was angry, even attacking Mr. Kenton at times. I searched the house for this thing that isn't allowed outside, but again, I found nothing. Then, I secretly witnessed Mr. Kenton beating up his wife just for dressing up as a cat, because apparently he hated cats. He forced his children to wear dog costumes, as apparently he loved dogs. Suddenly, the eldest daughter took Mr. Kenton's gun and shot her parents and her siblings that very night. The whole region was so shocked at how such a lovely, nice family could end up this way. The eldest daughter just made up an excuse, saying the devil told her to do it. Everyone kept saying how lovely the family was. It was then that I realized what this thing was. The thing the Kentons weren't letting out of the house. It wasn't anything physical. No, nothing so simple. The thing that was kept hostage inside their house this whole time was their true dysfunctional nature. A nature the whole neighborhood never saw. No one ever saw. No one apart from me. And so we've come to the end of our session. I would like to take a moment here to thank all you listeners who have joined us in this session. I would also like to go ahead and invite everyone attending to go ahead and check the link found in the description below. It is the source of this particular story and the original creator, so do give them a special thanks and do let them know who it was that sent you their way. Your support means a lot, and I cannot stress this enough, so please consider liking, commenting, and even subscribing to the channel. Then lastly, for those who are willing, consider having a look at our Patreon page and keep up to date with our latest narrations and some other opportunities. This was DrTorment bidding you adieu, and remember, don't fall asleep ever.